I nearly choked on my beer while sitting in a strip club, the dark hum of music and laughter fading into static. There she was, Samantha, my wife of 12 years, stepping onto the stage. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe it was the dim lights or the alcohol, but when she began to sway to the music, all doubt evaporated. The room felt suffocating. A guy next to me, a stranger with a face like a wrinkled road map, patted my shoulder. "You can even rent that SL*T for the night," he chuckled. "Trust me, she's worth every dollar." I froze. Every fiber of me wanted to punch his teeth in, but the words stabbed deeper than any fist could. Rent her? My wife? I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I stood up and walked away, leaving my untouched beer behind. My legs carried me out of the club before my mind caught up with what I'd just seen. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I didn't even make it to my car. My stomach churned, and I retched on the curb. Questions hammered my brain. What the hell is going on? How long has this been happening? Why the F*** didn't I see this coming? I stumbled into the nearest open diner, still dazed. The fluorescent lights made the place feel too bright, too fake, like everything else in my life. I ordered black coffee I didn't drink and stared at the table for what felt like hours. Somewhere between disbelief and anger, exhaustion took over. I decided to go home and confront her. But as fate would have it, the night had one more twist waiting. Driving back, my chest tightened. Not just with fury or betrayal, something deeper, more physical. Pain shot through me like a lightning bolt. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I barely made it to the hospital before everything went black. When I woke up, a doctor stood over me, his face somber. "Mr. Carter, you're not in good shape," he said. "Your symptoms are worsening. If you keep ignoring them, one day you won't wake up. Think about what's truly important, because you don't have much time left." Much time left? The words rang in my head like a death knell. Everything was crumbling. My body, my marriage, my life, all at once. Lying in that hospital bed, the image of Samantha dancing on that stage haunted me. Her smile wasn't the one I knew, it was predatory, confident, nothing like the woman I married. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for answers, I was fighting for whatever time I had left to make sense of this mess and decide how I'd spend it. And I wouldn't waste another second being a fool. When I was discharged the next morning, the world felt different, colder, harsher. The doctor's words hung heavy in my mind, "You don't have much time left." I didn't know how much time I had, but I sure as hell wasn't going to spend it being lied to. Samantha had secrets, and it was time I uncovered them. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts kept circling back to that strip club. How long had she been doing this? Did she ever care about me, or had she just been playing a role all these years? The memories of her laughing at my bad jokes, pretending to care about my long workdays, now felt like a mockery. When I got home, the house was quiet, eerily so. Samantha's car wasn't in the driveway, and I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because I didn't have to face her immediately, and anger because I didn't know where she was. I walked inside, noting the little details I'd ignored before, a faint smell of perfume I didn't recognize, a pile of mail she hadn't touched, and a lingering sense of detachment in everything she'd done lately. I wasn't the kind of guy to snoop, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Starting in the bedroom, I rifled through drawers, closet corners, and shoe boxes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I opened her laptop. She'd left it unlocked, an oversight that spoke volumes about her confidence. My fingers trembled as I clicked on her messages. There they were, a slew of texts with some guy named Ryan. I didn't know Ryan, but judging by their tone, he knew my wife intimately. The messages were disgusting, full of innuendos and plans for secret meetups. One line stood out like a knife to my gut: "Can't wait to see you at the club tonight. You always steal the show." My chest tightened again, but this time, I welcomed the pain. It grounded me, made the betrayal feel real. I took screenshots of everything, sending them to my email. If Samantha thought I'd crumble quietly, she didn't know me at all. The door opened downstairs, and I heard her voice. "David? Are you home?" She sounded cheerful, oblivious. For a second, I considered waiting, letting her dig her own grave with lies. But I was done waiting. "I'm upstairs," I called out, my voice colder than I intended. Samantha appeared in the doorway moments later, her smile faltering as she saw me with her laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone suddenly defensive. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stared at her, taking in the woman I thought I knew. She wore a tight-fitting dress and heels, her hair perfectly done. It wasn't an outfit for grocery shopping or running errands, it was a costume for someone else. "What am I doing?" I repeated, standing up. "I could ask you the same thing. Or maybe I should ask Ryan." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I grabbed my phone and showed her the screenshots. "This. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about." For a moment, she didn't say anything, her eyes darting between me and the phone. Then, to my astonishment, she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "So what if I've been talking to Ryan?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "You're hardly a saint, David. Always working late, always tired. You don't even look at me anymore." Her words hit me like bricks. "You're blaming me?" I said, my voice rising. "You're the one sneaking around, stripping for strangers, and God knows what else, and somehow this is my fault." "Oh, grow up," she spat, rolling her eyes. "Do you really think marriage is about love and loyalty? Get over yourself. Life's not some fairy tale." Her dismissiveness stung more than her betrayal. It was like she didn't even care enough to lie convincingly. I wanted to scream, to shake her until she admitted everything, but something inside me stopped. The doctor's warning flashed in my mind: think about what's truly important. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why would you do this to us?" Samantha sneered. "Because I'm bored, David. You're boring. This life is boring. Ryan makes me feel alive. The club makes me feel alive. You wouldn't understand." I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. There was no remorse in her voice, no guilt. Just contempt. "I hope it's worth it," I said, my voice steady now. "Because I'm done." She laughed again, but there was an edge of nervousness this time. "Oh, please. You don't have the guts to leave. Where would you go? What would you do? You need me more than I need you." Her arrogance was the final straw. "We'll see about that," I said, grabbing my keys and walking past her. As I drove away, a strange calm settled over me. Samantha was right about one thing: life wasn't a fairy tale. But that didn't mean I had to stay trapped in her nightmare. I didn't go far after leaving the house. I parked in an empty lot under a streetlight, staring at the steering wheel as my mind raced. Samantha's words echoed in my head: "You need me more than I need you." She said it with such confidence, like she'd already won, like I was nothing without her. The anger came in waves. One moment, I wanted to punch something. The next, I felt hollow, like a part of me had been surgically removed without anesthesia. This woman, my wife, the person I built a life with, wasn't the same person I thought I knew. I didn't know who she was anymore, but I was damn sure she wasn't the woman I wanted beside me when the clock ran out on my life. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Samantha. I ignored the call, then watched as the screen lit up with her texts. David, come back. Let's talk about this like adults. Running away doesn't solve anything. Don't be stupid, David. We're married. You can't just leave. Each message was more manipulative than the last. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to control me, the way she always had without me even realizing it. The text stopped, and I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes. I needed a plan. The first step was simple: lawyer up. The next morning, I met with a divorce attorney named Karen Benson. She was sharp, no nonsense, and exactly the kind of person I needed on my side. I handed over the screenshots of Samantha's messages and explained everything: the strip club, the affair, her complete lack of remorse. Karen nodded as she scribbled notes. Infidelity isn't just a personal betrayal, she said. It has legal consequences. With these messages and her work at the club, we have enough to file for divorce and potentially protect your assets. Her confidence gave me a sliver of hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had some control. File the papers, I said, my voice firm. Karen smiled. I'll get started immediately. When I got back to the house later that afternoon, Samantha was waiting for me. She was sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, her face a mask of irritation. Where the hell have you been? She demanded as soon as I walked in. None of your business, I said, brushing past her. Her eyes narrowed. Don't you dare pull the silent treatment, David. We're not kids. If you've got something to say, say it. I turned to face her, my fists clenching at my sides. Fine. I've been meeting with a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. The color drained from her face for half a second before she recovered, plastering on a smug grin. You're bluffing. Try me, I said. Her smile wavered, but she kept up the act. Do you really think you'll get away with this? Divorce isn't cheap, David. And guess what? I'll make sure you lose everything. Her words stung, but they didn't scare me. You don't scare me, Samantha. Not anymore. For the first time, I saw something crack in her armor. Fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. She didn't expect me to fight back. You're pathetic, she hissed, standing up and getting in my face. You've always been pathetic. That's why you'll die alone. Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, but I didn't let her see it. I stepped back, keeping my voice calm. Maybe I will, but at least I'll have my dignity. Can you say the same? She flinched, her bravado slipping further. Screw you, David. I think you've screwed enough people already, I shot back before heading upstairs. In the days that followed, Samantha did everything she could to make my life hell. She maxed out our credit cards, threw out my belongings, and even tried to convince our mutual friends that I was the one who destroyed our marriage. But I didn't care. Every petty act, every venomous word only solidified my resolve. One evening, I found myself at the strip club again. Not to see Samantha, but to face the reality of what my life had become. As I nursed a beer, I noticed a familiar face on stage, Ryan. The man from her texts. He was cheering her on like a proud idiot, throwing money at her feet as if she was some prize he'd won. It hit me then, this wasn't just betrayal. This was who Samantha had chosen to be. And Ryan? He was welcome to her. One of the men at the bar leaned over, smirking. That your girl? Not anymore, I said, finishing my drink. I left the club feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Samantha could have her stage, her lies, her fake life. I was done carrying the weight of her deceit. When I got home that night, I packed a bag and left the house for good. The divorce papers were in motion, and I didn't need to stick around for the fireworks. Samantha could play her games, but I was done being her pawn. Walking away from that house, from Samantha, and the life we'd built, or rather the illusion of it, felt like shedding a second skin. I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and peeling wallpaper. It wasn't much, but for now, it was mine. I sat on the lumpy bed, my duffel bag slumped in the corner, and stared at the ceiling. The silence was almost oppressive, but I needed it. I needed space to think, to process. But thinking only opened the floodgates to memories, and each one was laced with bitterness. The way Samantha used to lean on my shoulder during late-night movies. The nights we'd laughed about nothing, or so I thought. Was any of it real? I didn't have the answer, but one thing was clear: the woman I thought I married no longer existed. Maybe she never had. By the second night, the motel's thin walls and my thoughts became too much. I decided to go for a drive, the open road always my solace in times of chaos. The hum of the engine was steady, a rhythm that drowned out the noise in my head. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't outrun the question that gnawed at me: what comes next? I parked at an empty overlook, the city lights twinkling in the distance like tiny promises I wasn't ready to believe. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, Samantha's name flashing on the screen. Ignore it, I told myself. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello? I answered, my voice colder than I intended. David, she started, her tone softer than it had been in weeks. Where are you? We need to talk. No, Samantha, I said firmly. You need to talk. I need to move on. There was a long pause, the kind that felt like a test of willpower. I know I hurt you, she said finally, her voice dripping with something that might have been guilt, or another one of her manipulations. But we can fix this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away. I almost laughed. The sheer audacity of her to frame herself as the victim was astounding. Throw it all away? I repeated. You did that the second you stepped onto that stage, Samantha. The second you lied to me. You're just upset because I'm finally calling you out on it. Her tone shifted instantly, sharp and defensive. You don't understand what it's like, David. To feel trapped. To feel invisible in your own life. Maybe if you paid attention to me, I wouldn't have had to. Don't you dare, I interrupted, my voice rising. Don't you dare blame me for your choices. I worked my ass off for this family, for you, and you repay me by sneaking around and stripping for strangers? By sleeping with another man? Silence on the other end. Then, in a quieter voice, I didn't sleep with him. I didn't believe her for a second. You think that makes it better? You think that erases the lies, the betrayal? David, please, she said, but I'd had enough. Don't call me again, I said, hanging up before she could respond. I sat there for a while, staring at the dark horizon. The conversation should have left me feeling satisfied, vindicated even. Instead, it only deepened the pit in my stomach. Samantha wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She was only sorry she got caught. The next day, I returned to the house to grab the rest of my things. I timed it carefully, making sure Samantha wouldn't be there. I didn't need another screaming match, and I certainly didn't want to hear more excuses. As I packed, I noticed how hollow the house felt. The walls that once echoed with laughter now seemed to mock me with their silence. I found little reminders of the life we'd shared, a photo of us on our anniversary trip to the mountains, a postcard from her favorite art exhibit. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did neither. I just kept packing. Then I found something that stopped me cold. In the back of the closet, buried under a pile of clothes, was a small lockbox. I'd never seen it before, and it wasn't mine. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pried it open with a screwdriver from the garage. Inside were wads of cash, thousands of dollars, and a cheap burner phone. My stomach churned as I flipped through the phone's messages. They were worse than anything I'd imagined. Not just conversations with Ryan, but with multiple men. They weren't just flirtatious, they were transactional. My blood ran cold as I realized what Samantha had been doing. The strip club wasn't just a performance, it was a front. This wasn't just an affair. It was something darker, uglier, and far more dangerous. Suddenly, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a crime scene. I stuffed the lockbox into my bag and left without looking back. I sat in my motel room that night, staring at the evidence. The money, the phone, the texts, they painted a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. It was clear now that Samantha's betrayal ran deeper than I ever thought possible. But this time, I wasn't going to let anger or heartbreak paralyze me. This time, I was going to do something about it. I couldn't sleep that night, staring at the burner phone and the stack of cash as if they might come alive and explain themselves. The messages on the phone swirled in my mind, painting a grotesque picture of Samantha's double life. Stripping wasn't just a hobby or a cry for attention, it was a gateway to something darker, more deliberate. She wasn't just lying to me, she was running a side hustle, and I couldn't even fathom the depths of her deceit. I needed answers. At first, I thought about going straight to the police, but then I hesitated. What if this wasn't enough? What if Samantha had covered her tracks so well that I ended up looking like a spiteful husband trying to ruin his wife's life? No, I needed more than suspicion. So, I did something I never thought I'd do, I called a private investigator. The next morning, I met with Marcus Hale in a nondescript coffee shop downtown. Marcus was a former cop turned PI, with sharp eyes that seemed to see through me as soon as I sat down. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked, flipping open a battered notepad. I slid the burner phone and the cash across the table. "My wife's been lying to me for months. Stripping, having an affair. But this?" I gestured to the evidence. "This feels bigger than just cheating. I need to know what she's involved in." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll look into it. It might take a few days. In the meantime, lay low. Don't let her know you're on to her." That was the plan, until Samantha forced my hand. 2 days later, I was at the motel when she showed up unannounced, pounding on the door like a woman possessed. "David! Open up," she yelled. I froze. How the hell had she found me? When I opened the door, she stormed in, her face a mask of fury. "You've been avoiding me, ignoring my calls. What are you doing?" "What am I doing?" I shot back. "What the hell are you doing, Samantha?" She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Don't play games with me. I know you've been snooping around. You had no right to go through my things." "Your things?" I laughed bitterly. "Like the burner phone and the pile of cash hidden in our closet?" "What's that about, Samantha? More fun money for your side gigs?" Her face paled, but she recovered quickly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, give me a break, David. That money is none of your business. You've always been so uptight, so controlling. Maybe I just wanted a little freedom." "Freedom?" I shouted, my patience snapping. "Freedom to do what, Samantha? Sell yourself? Sleep around? Lie to me every single day?" She smirked, and the look in her eyes made my stomach turn. "If you're so miserable, why don't you just leave already?" Her words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I stood there, stunned by how easily she dismissed everything we'd built together. But then, I realized something. I didn't need her approval, her explanations, or even her lies anymore. "I already have," I said quietly. She stared at me, her smirk fading. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done playing your games. The divorce papers are being processed, and I've got enough evidence to make sure you don't walk away from this unscathed." her face twisted with rage. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just walk away and leave me with nothing?" "That's exactly what I think," I said, stepping closer. "You underestimated me, Samantha. That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was thinking I'd let you keep lying to my face." For a moment, she looked like she might say something else, but then she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, Marcus called with an update. "You were right to suspect her," he said. "The club's more than a strip joint, it's a front for a high-end escort ring. Your wife's not just involved, she's one of their top earners." The words hit me like a freight train. "Are you sure?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "I've got photos, financial records, even conversations between her and the club's manager. It's all here, David. She's in deep." I sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "What do I do now?" "That depends," Marcus said. "Do you want to confront her, or do you want to take this straight to the authorities?" The thought of confronting Samantha again made my blood boil, but I knew it wouldn't solve anything. This wasn't just about me anymore. She was part of something bigger, something dangerous. "Go to the authorities," I said. "Give them everything you've got." That evening, as I sat in my motel room, I felt a strange sense of closure. Samantha's betrayal had been like a knife to the heart, but now I understood the full scope of her deceit. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd betrayed herself, throwing away any shred of decency for a life of lies and exploitation. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I was done letting her control my life. As I stared out the window at the setting sun, I felt the weight of her betrayal lift ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The following days passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. I hadn't heard from Samantha since our last confrontation, and that silence felt more ominous than any screaming match. I avoided our house entirely, opting to let the divorce proceedings and Marcus's investigation handle the dirty work. Then came the call I'd been waiting for, this time, from a detective. "Mr. Carter? This is Detective Rowe with the County Police Department. We've been provided some evidence from your private investigator regarding the activities of the club your wife was involved with. I'd like to ask you a few questions." His voice was calm, almost clinical, but I could feel the weight behind it. Samantha wasn't just playing a dangerous game, she was about to lose it. I met Detective Rowe at the station, handing over the burner phone and cash I'd taken from the lockbox. He listened carefully as I explained everything: how I found the phone, the messages, the hidden cash, and my discovery of Samantha's second life. "Your wife is involved in a larger operation than you might have realized," Rowe said, flipping through a file. "We've been investigating this club for months. It's not just an escort ring, it's linked to money laundering and potential trafficking. Your cooperation has given us the missing pieces to move forward." My stomach churned. I thought I knew the depths of Samantha's betrayal, but this was worse than I could have imagined. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're preparing to make arrests," Rowe replied. "Your wife will likely be taken in for questioning, and given the evidence, she's facing significant charges. We'll need you to stay available in case we require further testimony." I left the station feeling both vindicated and hollow. Part of me wanted to celebrate that Samantha's lies had finally caught up with her, but another part couldn't ignore the weight of it all. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about her. 2 days later, the hammer came down. I was sitting in my motel room when my phone buzzed with a notification: local news. "Breaking: police raid local strip club in connection with escort ring, multiple arrests made." I clicked the link and there she was, Samantha, being escorted from the club in handcuffs, her face partially obscured by a jacket she'd thrown over her head. The accompanying article detailed the operation, naming Samantha as one of the key players. I stared at the screen, my emotions a tangled mess of satisfaction, sadness, and disbelief. This was the woman I'd once loved, the woman I'd promised to build a life with. How had it come to this? The text started rolling in shortly after. Friends, colleagues, even distant relatives, all wanting to know if I'd seen the news. Is this real? One message read. What the hell happened, David? Another asked. I ignored them all. I didn't have the energy to explain, nor did I owe anyone an explanation. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Samantha's number, but I hesitated. Why would she be calling me now, from jail no less? Against my better judgment, I picked up. David, her voice was shaky, raw. I need your help. I laughed bitterly. My help? After everything you've done, you think I'm going to swoop in and save you? Please, just listen, she pleaded. I didn't have a choice. Her voice broke. They blackmailed me, David. They threatened me. I never wanted to hurt you, but I didn't know how to get out. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered the months of lies, the smug look on her face during our confrontations, and the way she dismissed me like I was nothing. I don't believe you, I said coldly. David, please. You made your bed, Samantha. Now lie in it. I hung up, my hands trembling. The days that followed were surreal. The news coverage intensified, with Samantha's face plastered across every channel. She'd been released on bail, but her reputation, and her future, were in tatters. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but instead, I just felt exhausted. Watching her life implode didn't bring the satisfaction I'd imagined. One evening, as I sat on the edge of the motel bed, Karen Benson, my attorney, called with an update. Samantha's legal troubles are going to work in your favor, she said. She's not in any position to contest the divorce or make claims on your assets. Frankly, the court will likely side with you on everything. It was the first piece of good news I'd had in weeks. What happens to her now? I asked, more out of curiosity than concern. She'll face trial, and if convicted, she could be looking at serious jail time. But that's no longer your problem, David. Focus on moving forward. Her words stuck with me. Moving forward. It felt like such a simple concept, yet it seemed impossibly far away. A week later, I returned to the house one last time to finalize the sale. It was strange walking through those familiar rooms, now stripped of furniture and memories. As I stood in the empty living room, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the heartbreak, it had all brought me to this moment. And yet, I felt lighter. Samantha's choices no longer defined me. Her lies no longer controlled me. I locked the door and walked away, leaving the house, and my old life, behind for good. The house was gone. The divorce was finalized. And Samantha? She was buried in legal troubles so deep that even the most skilled lawyer wouldn't be able to dig her out. I should have felt victorious, yet all I felt was a numb kind of exhaustion. It's one thing to burn the bridges behind you, it's another to stand in the ashes, wondering where to go next. I took a few weeks off work, something I hadn't done in years. My boss was surprisingly understanding, though I could tell he was more relieved than supportive. Divorces made people uncomfortable, especially messy ones like mine. Take all the time you need, he'd said, probably hoping I'd return less of a disaster than I'd been these past few months. I spent those weeks driving aimlessly, following back roads and highways with no particular destination in mind. Sometimes I stayed in motels, other times I slept in my car under the stars. The solitude was both freeing and suffocating. One night, I found myself parked at the edge of a lake, the water so still it looked like glass. I leaned against the hood of my car, a beer in hand, and let the quiet wash over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel everything. The anger. The sadness. The betrayal. And then, something unexpected, gratitude. Not for Samantha's actions, of course, nothing could justify what she'd done. But for the clarity it brought. The truth, as ugly as it was, had freed me from a life built on lies. I wasn't tied down anymore, wasn't shackled to someone who didn't value me. For the first time, I could choose my own path. The next morning, I started making calls. The first was to Marcus Hale, the private investigator who'd helped unravel Samantha's schemes. "Marcus, it's David," I said when he picked up. "I just wanted to thank you. Without your help, I don't know where I'd be right now." "Glad I could help," he replied, his tone professional but warm. "You've been through a lot, David. Take care of yourself." The second call was to Karen, my attorney. "Karen, I'm ready to put this chapter behind me," I said. "What's the next step?" She walked me through the final paperwork for the divorce settlement. Samantha hadn't contested a thing, probably because she knew she didn't stand a chance. The house was already on the market, and the proceeds would go straight to me. "Honestly, David, you're walking away from this in a better position than most," Karen said. "Use it as a fresh start." By the end of the month, I'd found a small apartment in a new city. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-bedroom with a view of the skyline, but it was mine. No memories of Samantha, no ghosts of the past. I threw myself into setting up the new space, enjoying the simplicity of choosing furniture and decorations without anyone else's input. It was oddly therapeutic, a way of reclaiming control over my life. On my first night there, I cooked dinner for myself, something I hadn't done in years. I poured a glass of wine, turned on some music, and sat down to eat at my tiny kitchen table. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory. Life didn't magically get easier after that, but it started to make sense again. I went back to work, focusing on projects that challenged and inspired me. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during my marriage. One of those friends was Mike, a college buddy I hadn't seen in years. We met for drinks at a local bar, catching up on everything from work to sports. "So, what's next for you?" Mike asked as we clinked glasses. "Honestly? I'm not sure," I admitted. "But for the first time, that doesn't scare me. I'm taking it one day at a time." He grinned. "That's the spirit. You deserve a win, man." The true turning point came a few months later, when I decided to volunteer at a local community center. They were running a mentorship program for at-risk teens, and something about it resonated with me. I met Marcus, a quiet 16-year-old who'd been through more in his short life than most adults could handle. His father had walked out, his mother was struggling with addiction, and he was teetering on the edge of dropping out of school. At first, Marcus barely spoke to me. But week by week, he started to open up, sharing bits and pieces of his life. I didn't push him, just listened, offering advice when he asked for it. One day, as we were working on a project together, he looked up at me and said, "Thanks for sticking around, Mr. Carter. Most people don't." His words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I realized something important. While Samantha's betrayal had shattered me, it hadn't defined me. I still had the capacity to make a difference, to build something meaningful. By the time Samantha's trial came around, I'd moved so far past her that it barely registered as more than a footnote in my life. She was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to several years in prison. I didn't attend the trial, didn't need to see her face or hear her excuses. Marcus texted me updates, but I didn't ask for details. It was over. Looking back, I can't say I'm grateful for what happened, not in the way people like to romanticize pain. But I am grateful for what I learned, about myself, about resilience, and about the kind of life I want to build. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone going through something similar, it's this: don't let someone else's lies define you. You're stronger than you think, and there's always a way forward. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger or retribution, it's living a life they can't touch. Months had passed since the storm of my life settled into an uneasy calm. My new apartment felt like home, and my work at the community center gave me purpose. Samantha's conviction brought closure, and with her out of the picture, I was finally free to rebuild my life. Then, out of nowhere, the unexpected came knocking. It started with a simple envelope left at my door. No name, no return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. I opened it cautiously, my stomach twisting as I pulled out a single sheet of paper. The message was short. David, I know you think you've moved on, but there's something you don't know. Meet me at the park, 10 p.m. The bench near the fountain. It's about Samantha. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of scam or prank. But as I stared at the note, an uneasy feeling settled over me. What could possibly be left to say about Samantha? She was behind bars, her life in ruins. What could anyone gain from dragging me back into her mess? Against my better judgment, I decided to go. The park was quiet and dark when I arrived, the only sound coming from the trickling fountain. I spotted the bench and approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and walk away. Sitting there, shrouded in shadows, was a man I didn't recognize. He was older, his face weathered, but his posture was confident, calculated. He gestured for me to sit. "You're David Carter," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Call me Frank," he said. "I worked with Samantha." I froze. Worked with her how? "She wasn't just some dancer at that club," Frank said. "She was my partner in an operation much bigger than you can imagine. And before you get any ideas, I'm not here to hurt you. In fact, I'm here to warn you." I sat down, my heart pounding. "Warn me about what?" Frank leaned closer, his eyes cold. "Samantha wasn't just running an escort operation. She was skimming from the wrong people, people who don't forgive and forget. When she got arrested, it wasn't just you who walked away clean. You got lucky, David. But your luck's run out." My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "She made deals with dangerous men, and when she couldn't deliver, she made you the scapegoat. Told them you knew everything, that you had the money." He chuckled darkly. "Smart move, really. She knew you'd leave her, but she also knew they'd come after you instead of her." The world tilted around me. That's insane. I didn't know anything about her schemes. Why would she? "Because Samantha only ever cared about Samantha," Frank interrupted. "She was always 10 steps ahead, and she didn't care who she had to sacrifice to save herself." I wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down, I knew it was true. This was exactly the kind of cruel, calculated move she'd make. "So, what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Frank sighed. "You have 2 choices. Run, change your name, start over somewhere far away. Or, you deal with them head on." I didn't sleep that night, my mind racing with possibilities. Was Frank telling the truth, or was this just another cruel twist in Samantha's endless game? Either way, I couldn't ignore the possibility that I was in real danger. The next day, I packed my things. I called Marcus, the private investigator, and told him everything. "This isn't the kind of mess you want to handle alone," Marcus said. "Let me make a few calls." By the time the sun set, I had a new name, a new identity, and a one-way ticket out of the city. Marcus's contacts worked fast, but I knew this wasn't just about paperwork. I was leaving everything behind, again. The last person I called before leaving was Karen, my attorney. David, this is serious, she said after I explained the situation. You're doing the right thing by disappearing. But make no mistake, this isn't over. People like that don't just forget. Her words stayed with me as I boarded the plane, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a lifetime of shattered memories. Months later, I found myself in a small coastal town, working as a bartender under a name that still felt foreign on my tongue. The ocean air was crisp, the locals friendly, and for a while, I almost felt normal. But the past has a way of finding you. One evening, as I was closing the bar, a man walked in. He was tall, with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. "Quiet place you've got here," he said, his voice calm but menacing. My blood ran cold. "I'm just passing through," he continued, placing a small envelope on the counter. "But I wanted to leave you something. A reminder that you can't run forever." I didn't open the envelope until he was gone. Inside was a single photo, me, sitting at the bar, smiling as I poured drinks. No words. Just a chilling reminder that Samantha's web of lies had caught me again, no matter how far I ran. That night, I stared out at the ocean, the crashing waves a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about surviving Samantha's betrayal. It was about surviving the world she dragged me into. The thought hit me like a thunderclap: my life would never truly be mine again. And so, as the sun set over the horizon, I made my decision. This time, I wouldn't run. This time, I'd fight.